Bishop T.D. Jakes, the leader of Dallas megachurch, the Potter's House, announced today that he will be stepping down.
Nobody saw this coming. The moment T.D. Jakes stood at his own pulpit and told his congregation he was stepping down, something shifted in the church world that cannot be undone.
Holy Spirit, direct our paths. We seek thy face, O God. You are in a class all by yourself. You're sovereign God.
Within days, one name started flooding the internet in connection with his, a name tied to Jakes in ways most people never fully understood. Her name was Juanita Bynum, a woman whose ministry was born inside his world, and what she was now saying was something the church was not ready to hear. The day he said goodbye. Before we get into Juanita Bynum and what she exposed, you need to understand exactly what set this whole story in motion. Because what T.D. Jakes' announcement was not a rumor, not something manufactured by people who wanted to see him fall. It was real, documented, and delivered live from the pulpit of the Potter's House in Dallas, Texas, on Sunday, April the 27th, 2025. If you have ever watched T.D. Jakes preach, you already know what that building represents. 30,000 members, sermons that reached hundreds of millions of people worldwide, conferences that sold out arenas every year, best-selling books, major Hollywood films, a ministry empire that made most corporations look modest by comparison. So when this man stood up in that same building and said he was stepping away, the silence in that room must have been something nobody present will ever forget. His exact words, reported by Fox 4 Dallas, were these: "I cannot afford, especially after November, to risk something happening to me, and you be sheep without a shepherd." He was talking about November the 24th, 2024, the night he suffered a heart attack while standing on his own stage during a live service. He did not die, but everyone present knew how close it came. And here is the detail that tells you everything about this man's relationship with power. After collapsing, he reportedly asked for the microphone. He had just had a cardiac event, and his first instinct was to keep performing. He told his congregation he had gone to his board because he was genuinely worried about what happens to men who refuse to leave. His words, "I have seen too many men build something and stay so long that they kill what they build." That sentence reveals that Jakes had been watching the men around him collapse for a very long time and made a calculated choice not to be one of them. The two people he handed the ministry to were his daughter, Pastor Sarah Jakes Roberts, and her husband, Pastor Touré Roberts, who had been quietly expanding their roles inside the church for years. Sarah stood up in that same service and told her father, "You had a heart attack on stage and still asked for the microphone so that they would be okay over you. I know what this costs." But here is what barely made it into the coverage. Jakes is keeping his chairmanship of the T.D. Jakes Group, the separate business entity behind his films, his publishing operation, and his MegaFest conference empire. He is walking away from Sunday morning. He is not walking away from the money. That distinction matters enormously, and it is one that Juanita Bynum has spent years knowing exactly how to read. But to understand what Bynum saw in that announcement that most people missed entirely, you first have to understand how deep inside this world she has actually been. The woman he helped build. Juanita Bynum was not a name anyone outside small ministry circles knew before she walked onto T.D. Jakes' stage. She was a preacher with a testimony, a woman carrying years of personal pain about sexual brokenness, failed relationships, and the slow process of rebuilding a life that had been torn apart. Then she stood up at his Woman Thou Art Loosed conference and delivered what became known simply as the No More Sheets sermon. Bynum became a name that millions of women in the church community held on to as evidence that somebody in leadership was telling the truth about real life. Jakes put her in front of that crowd. He gave her that stage. And for years, she remained a recurring presence at his conferences, appearing as recently as 2018 at the Woman Thou Art Loosed platform. Their professional relationship was visible, sustained, and built on a dynamic that has always defined the megachurch world. The powerful leader elevates the voice that draws in the crowd, and the elevated voice owes her entire platform to the powerful leader. That is not a criticism.
Work while it's day, for when night cometh, no man can work. But he didn't say God couldn't work.
It is simply how the machinery works. What makes Bynum's story so significant in relation to Jake's is not that she turned against him. It is that she eventually turned her lens on the entire system they both operated inside, and did not protect it when she did. In an August 2024 appearance on CBN's 700 Club Interactive in an episode titled Too Big for God, she spoke openly about spending 14 years in what she described as a spiritual black hole. She talked about the weight of pride, about the moment a ministry stops being about calling and starts being about maintaining a brand that has grown larger than the person running it. She was talking about herself, but every single concern she raised maps directly onto what the church is now being forced to examine in relation to every celebrity pastor who built an empire and then found himself too powerful to be questioned while he was still at the top. The real disturbing truth about Bynum's position is not that she spoke out against Jake's. It is that she understood from the inside exactly what the cost of that world is, because she had already paid a version of it in the most violent and personal way imaginable. What happened to Juanita Bynum in a hotel parking lot in Atlanta in 2007 changed the way she saw powerful men in ministry forever. And the church community's response to it was one of the most revealing moments in modern American Christianity. The night in Atlanta. In August of 2007, Juanita Bynum was attacked by her then-husband, Bishop Thomas W. Weeks III, in the parking lot of an Atlanta hotel. This is not a rumor. It is court-documented and reported by Fox 5 Atlanta. What took place in that parking lot was not an argument that escalated. It was a sustained physical assault by a man carrying enormous spiritual authority who believed on some level that his position would protect him from consequences. On March the 11th, 2008, Weeks entered a guilty plea on a charge of aggravated assault under first offender status. He admitted in that plea that he grabbed his wife by the throat, threw her to the ground, and kicked her. The sentence he received was 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service outside any church setting, mandatory anger management, and a no violent contact order with Bynum. He did not serve a single day in prison. The reason he did not serve prison time is the piece of this story most people never sit with long enough. Bynum was the one who asked District Attorney Paul Howard to remove jail time from consideration. Thomas Weeks's elderly grandfather had reached out to her, and despite everything she had endured, she chose to extend mercy to a man who had put her on the ground of a public parking lot. They divorced and never reconciled, but she had still made that choice from a place of deliberate grace rather than fear. Now think about what it means to be that woman, and to have spent 20 years operating inside the same church world where men with spiritual authority routinely face no meaningful accountability, to have been attacked in public, to have watched your attacker walk away with probation, and to continue building a ministry inside a culture that circles the wagons around its leaders the moment their image is threatened. Bynum did not become bitter. She became sharper. And the weight behind everything she would eventually say about this world came from a woman who had already seen exactly what it costs to trust the wrong kind of power with your life. That lived experience is precisely why, when everything around T.D. Jakes began to crack, the people who truly knew Bynum's story understood immediately why her name was the one being spoken. the man behind the allegations. By the time Jakes stepped behind his pulpit to announce his departure, he had already survived one of the most sustained public assault campaigns in the history of American megachurch leadership. What matters here is not just what was alleged. What matters is how it was engineered, who was behind it, and what the documented outcomes actually show. The most direct attack came from a former associate pastor named Dwayne Youngblood, who in an interview on Larry Reed Live around October the 31st, 2024, alleged that a much younger T.D. Jakes had made an unwanted advance toward him decades earlier. The allegation spread at extraordinary speed. Jakes denied it completely and filed a federal defamation lawsuit against Youngblood in the Western District of Pennsylvania in November of 2024. Inside that lawsuit, things collapsed for Youngblood's legal team almost immediately. A motion to dismiss was filed and rejected. A subsequent motion was discovered to contain fabricated case citations, the kind of non-existent legal references that only appear when artificial intelligence tools are used carelessly without any human review. The judge sanctioned the attorney $5,000. The case was voluntarily dismissed by both parties on October the 16th, 2025, with no finding of any kind against Jakes. Separately, Jakes' pulled into the civil lawsuit filed against Sean Combs by a former associate named Rodney Jones. Jakes denied everything. In a recorded interview, he described stopping by a daytime birthday gathering for roughly 30 minutes and addressed the implications being drawn around that visit head-on, rather than going quiet. The most underreported development was Jakes filing a federal application to compel Google to identify the anonymous creator of artificial intelligence-generated images depicting him in deeply compromising positions alongside Combs. The court granted that subpoena on May the 30th, 2025. The anonymous creator, traced to South Africa under the pseudonym Prof X, attempted to block the order and failed. On August the 11th, 2025, judgment was entered in Jakes' favor. The man being painted online as someone with something to hide was simultaneously winning federal court orders against the people fabricating content about him. That detail disappears when the narrative is already decided. And that is exactly the kind of machinery Bynum had been warning about for years. What Juanita was really saying. The most important thing to understand about Juanita Bynum's documented commentary is that she has never needed to invent a criticism. The life she has lived and the system she operated inside gave her more than enough. And what she has been saying consistently, on record, is something the church community would rather not sit with. In her August 2024 appearance on CBN's 700 Club Interactive, Bynum described spending 14 years in a spiritual black hole. She did not blame anyone else for those years. She talked about her own pride, about the seductive pull of a public platform, and about the specific moment a ministry stops being about serving people and starts being about maintaining a machine so large it can no longer be stopped by the person who built it. She posed a question that should land hard for anyone who has followed this story closely. What happens to a leader, she asked, when the healing stops and the image takes over? What happens when the pressure to project a flawless public appearance becomes more important than the actual spiritual health of the person carrying that weight? What happens when a congregation needs its pastor to be perfect so badly that they quietly stop giving him permission to be human? That question is not abstract. It describes the specific trap that closes around every megachurch leader who built a ministry on the strength of their personal brand and then found themselves locked inside an institution that could not afford for them to crack. Jakes built a ministry where 30,000 people's faith was organized, in significant part, around his voice, around his presence, around the specific power of T.D. Jakes as a personality. For a man to carry that kind of load-bearing spiritual role is not just a professional risk. It is, according to Bynum's documented position, a failure of design. because it means the ministry was always built around the man and not around the calling. And when that man suffers a heart attack on stage and reaches for the microphone before he reaches for help, that instinct tells you precisely how long that pressure has been building inside him. Bynum's critique is not personal. What makes it so difficult to dismiss is that she is describing a system from the inside, a system she was elevated by, celebrated within, and damaged by in her own way. She is not speaking as an outsider looking in. She is speaking as someone who knows what that world looks like from the floor. And the floor of that world, in Dallas specifically, had been collapsing under people far more powerful than either of them for months before Jakes made his announcement. To understand why Jakes' departure landed the way it did, you have to understand what Dallas had already been living through in the 18 months before he stepped behind that microphone. Dallas was already on fire. Dallas is not just where Jakes built the Potter's house. Dallas is the unofficial capital of the American megachurch, and in the 18 months before his announcement, it had already watched two of its most established figures exit in circumstances that had nothing clean or planned about them whatsoever. In June of 2024, Robert Morris stepped down from Gateway Church, a congregation of roughly 25,000 members he had built into one of the most influential evangelical institutions in the country. The reason was not health. It was not a succession plan years in the making. It was the public disclosure of decades-old allegations of abuse involving a minor, a victim who stated the abuse began when she was 12 years old. Morris issued a statement acknowledging what he called inappropriate behavior with a young lady. Per the Christian Faith Archive investigative documentary published in December of 2025, Morris was facing criminal proceedings at the time of publication. That same month, Tony Evans stepped down from Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, a church he had built over more than 40 years, to roughly 10,000 members. He cited an unspecified past sin with no further detail at all, generating a wave of deep frustration from members who felt they deserved real transparency after decades of placing their trust in this man. Before either of those exits, Matt Chandler of the Village Church had already stepped back following the disclosure of inappropriate digital communication with a woman outside his marriage. 3 exits, 3 different congregations, 3 different situations. But researchers and theologians interviewed in the Christian Faith Archive documentary used remarkably similar language to describe what had allowed each situation to go unchallenged for so long. Boards staffed entirely by loyal supporters rather than independent voices. Theology that frames the pastor as anointed by God and therefore spiritually dangerous to question. Financial structures with no transparency to the people filling the seats every single week. And no denominational oversight creating accountability from anywhere outside the building itself. What Bynum has been describing in her documented public commentary is not a theory she developed in isolation. It is the exact operating system that produced every single one of those exits. The same machinery inside which T.D. Jakes built the largest church in Dallas survived a coordinated campaign of fabricated allegations and then walked out on his own terms while the buildings around him were still catching fire. He is handing over the Sunday morning pulpit. He is retaining the chairmanship of the T.D. Jakes Group, the entity behind Hollywood productions including Jumping the Broom and Heaven is for Real, a publishing operation behind multiple New York Times bestsellers and the MegaFest conference empire. The spiritual responsibility transfers to his daughter and son-in-law. The commercial operation stays with him. For people who love Jakes, that reads as wisdom. For his critics, it raises a direct and uncomfortable question about what this ministry was always structured to serve at its core. Bynum's documented position lands in the middle of that tension with the full weight of someone who has lived on both sides of it. The danger begins the moment a ministry becomes more about the brand than the calling. It reaches its most dangerous point when a leader suffers a cardiac arrest on stage and still reaches for the microphone, because stopping, even to save his own life, feels like a betrayal of the machine he built. She was not naming Jakes when she said it. She was naming the trap. And the verified, court-documented, broadcast-sourced story of everything that surrounds his departure is more disturbing than anything the internet manufactured, because the real exposure was never about one man's private life. It was always about the structure of how this world was built, what it costs the people inside it, and how long a congregation will choose the comfort of the brand over the inconvenience of the truth. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell me what you think the church keeps getting wrong about how it protects the people inside it, because this conversation is far from over.